As we consider being spiritually minded and trying to overcome the temptation of this life to focus upon and get caught up in this physical world, let us think about the words of Solomon as we read in Proverbs chapter 3. In verse 1, "My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lead not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord, and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel, and marrow to thy bones. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase." You know, it's interesting, this context here of Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 through 9, and the focus that we see on keeping God's law in our hearts. Pondering upon, thinking upon, meditating upon God's law, and applying them to our lives in every way we possibly can. Notice how he uses the language regarding binding them about thy neck, writing them upon the table of thine heart. Well, we're not literally going to be doing those things. The point is not to physically be strapping God's law as it's written to our bodies. You know, the Jewish people used to do these types of things. This is not what was being discussed here. Rather, the point is to apply them, insert them into your mind, so that therefore you can be meditating upon God's commandments, and you can have length of days, long life, and peace, and you can be glorifying God. And it's interesting as we think about the context and trusting in the Lord with all your heart, thinking about acknowledging God, be not wise in our own eyes. We see in verse 9 then, honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. Again, the giving up of the physical, the giving up of that which belongs to us. We are more provoked and more likely to do so if we are meditating upon God's commandments. Number one, we're more appreciative. We realize what God has done for us. We realize how marvelous his law is for us in our lives. But then number two, we're reflecting upon the commandments that teach us to give up of ourselves to God, to give it over to him out of thanksgiving because of what he's done for us. And so therefore we are provoked to give up on holding on to this physical world and having a spiritual mindset. So let us ponder upon God's law. Let us carry out the words of Solomon. Let us also carry out the words of the psalmist. Psalm chapter 1, verse 1, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night." The man that's going to be blessed, the man that's not going to be living in a physical minded way and be doing sinful worldly things, verse 1, is the man that is meditating upon God's law. Notice Psalm 119, verse 97. Oh how love I thy law. It is my meditation all the day. Loving God's law, meditating upon God's law. Why would we be concerned with meditating upon God's law? Well, we notice that hiding God's law in our hearts, meditating upon God's law, assists us in overcoming sin, assists us in being able to defeat sin. For example, Psalm 119, verse 11, "Thy word have I hid in mine heart, that I might not sin against thee." Well, sin is a transgression of God's law. Sin certainly is an act of worldliness, an act of rebellion against God. And so to be spiritually minded requires then the pondering of, the meditating upon God's law, so that we might be able to be wise rather than trusting in ourselves, and might be able to be provoked to give up our physical substances, so that we might be able to not walk in the counsel of the ungodly. We might not be able to fellowship and be in the same mindset of this physical world, and so that we can prevent ourselves from sin, knowing God's law and what it requires, so that we can overcome sin and know the way in which we are supposed to live and behave. Let us love God's law, and let us ponder and meditate upon it so that we can have spiritual mindedness.